Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at Secure IT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got myself, Brad, Darrius, and Spencer, all from the Offensive Security team here to talk to you today about certifications. That's a hot topic, probably a hotly debated one. So we'll see if we're all still friends at the end of this podcast. As always, if you like what we do, please share it with your friends and upvote, subscribe, all that good stuff. So with that said, who wants to take the first stab at the best pen testing certification out there?
Well, first,
I'm just kidding. We don't even have to start having. We don't have to start that.
And then swinging, coming out swinging hard, man.
Yeah, man.
Wait, are we on Reddit? Are we now upvoting the podcast?
Yeah, we are. Only if it's good though. Yeah. So I think just kind of get things started. It is a hotly debated topic, right? Certifications always have been. I remember when, for example, the CEH kind of hit the scene. It was all the hotness. Everybody wanted a CEH, and nowadays people don't look at it the same way. We should probably dive into why. But I think first, you had the opener you wanted, right, Spencer, that you want to talk about first?
Well, I was going to just set the stage a little bit and why we're going to have this podcast to begin with. And, one of the reasons, being in offensive security, cybersecurity, InfoSec in general, things are constantly changing, right? There's a lot of things. There's a lot of new stuff that comes out every week, every year. The fundamentals of security, right, don't change all that much. But the nuances and the technical bits change quite frequently, and it requires us to stay up to date, to continually sharpen our sword, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one of the reasons why we do certifications, right? Is to continue to get better, continue to elevate our skills, up our skills, and provide more value for our clients that we do work for. So that was kind of the background on certifications, and then Darrius and I started discussing the OSCP in our chat channel, and the good, the bad. I think Darrius maybe is more of an OSCP fanboy than me. I'm more hesitant on it, but those are some of the things I think would be interesting to talk about and just kind of hear our perspectives, all three of our perspectives on those certifications. Why we should get certifications. What value they provide, and then we'll talk about some specific certifications that we've taken, others we haven't taken yet, and kind of give our perspective on them as far as the value they provide to a pen tester.
Yeah.
So I know kind of one thing to add, and I know you touched on it, but I think it's super important, is the fact that everyone always asks, how can I break into the industry? How can I get how can I land that first gig? And like to your point, that's where certifications can definitely, come into play. But I think the important thing to remember is, a certification is just that. It's a piece of paper. So whether it's the OSCP or, the OSCP, whatever it is, it's a piece of paper at the end of the day. Certifications, they get you past HR. But ultimately it's your actual skill set that actually lands you the job and also allows you to keep the job. So I kind of wanted to mention that as well.
As a frame of reference, right? So in order to be a penetration tester on offensive security team, we require a new offensive security certification every year. Right. Yep. So it's and that's just an internal policy, an internal rule to make sure we're continuing to sharpen our sword. And so it does play into your career. Right. And you can get, like, for the longest time, if you got a CISSP, you got a raise. Right. Doesn't matter where you were. And that may still be the case in a lot of places, but like in corporate environments, even, it was such an important certification, not for pen testing. Right. Just generally speaking about certs. That it almost always came with a raise. And so there are some of those, and I'm sure we'll get into that too. But yeah, so you guys have probably had this question asked of you too, right? I want to be a pen tester. How can I be a pen tester? And the answer is uniformly, here are some certs. Go get those certs, and then come back and talk to me. Sure. It's a good starting point.
Yep.
Yeah, and some of the other reasons you would get a certification. Not only to get your first job, right, like we were talking about, but to move up, right, to go from getting, let's say you have your first job as a pen tester, move from a junior position to a non-junior position or a senior position. So those are other considerations as well. Building out your resume, and we have a whole list of things that we came up with, right, for why we get certifications. But just like anything else, they're not the end all be all either, right? I think maybe Darrius, you've got a lot of experience with building your own lab, like I do, right? Building your own lab, messing with things, building your own vulnerable web apps, things like that can really help build your skill set too outside of certifications. So this isn't just a one trick thing. There's other things you can do, but this is mainly a conversation on certifications.
Yep. And the biggest reason why you should get certified, obviously, is strictly for the clout. That's
a flex, man.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why the OSCP is a valid cert.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and it sounds funny, but to be fair, if I'm interviewing someone, right, as a hiring manager, if I want to hire a pen tester, I'm not even going to look at someone who doesn't have certs, right? And so, like, I don't care how skilled you are in the world that we live in, you have to have something. And part of the reason that I feel that way is because, for example, we have legal standards, like minimum training standards that we must adhere to be experts in our field, right? And this, for me, comes from being an expert witness back when I used to do a lot of incident response and forensics. You can't go get on a witness stand as an expert witness and be like, yeah, I'm an expert in forensics. And when they ask you what your credentials are, you're like, yeah, I watched some YouTube videos, right? Or I've been doing this for a while. You don't say that, right? You say, I am certified in the following. And you give those credentials. And so it's the same kind of thing here, right? If we're bidding on contracts, or if a client says, hey, how do I know your people are good at what they do? I can say, well, here's a list of certifications my team has.
Yep. Or so they literally wrote the book.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there.
But obviously there is a point where, if you literally wrote the book on like Kerberos or enter subject. But to your point, Brad, you don't. You're not
John Hammond. I'm not checking his certs, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think we all have a decent amount of certs, kind of between us. But I think kind of one of the questions is, how often are you actually utilizing the knowledge from your certs?
Yep. That's something I wanted to bring up too. Is like,
I'm in management. I don't do that stuff.
Manager right. Alert. We need like a buzz.
I made a PowerPoint presentation today.
Yeah, that's not what the CISP is all about, right? PowerPoints.
Yeah. Yep. But it's a good question, right?
Yeah, and it's something I want to bring up. It's like, when we talk about these certifications, let's talk about them in the frame of, do they actually help us with our job as a pen tester, right? And I started thinking about, what is our job as a pen tester? One of the ways that I describe it is to find, demonstrate, and articulate risk to the business. I'm sure we all have our own definition for what a pen tester is, or what the function is, or the purpose why we exist. But I started thinking about certifications in kind of that context. So, I'm thinking about, we do reporting, we talk to clients, we have to set schedules, and we have to determine scope and help figure that out. And there's a lot of other things we do as pen testers. And it's not just about, owning machine and getting the flag. There's a lot of other stuff too that I think should play into some of these certifications that don't. So that's kind of a framework too that I think about when I think about the value that a certification provides.
Go ahead, Darrius.
I definitely think there's definitely categories to it. At least that's kind of how I look at certs. You have your certs that are like, hey, you're actually going to get something from it, and you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be able to utilize it day to day. But I do also think there's a category of certs where you're essentially checking off boxes, and that's whether it's good or bad. I think it's up for debate. But I do think even the checking off the box type of certs do hold some value. Like, especially if you're trying to break into the industry or making that big jump. I know for me personally, it wasn't until I got my CISP that I was finally kind of able to move into a pure security role. And that's the case for a lot of people, I feel like. And so I think it kind of depends on for me, it's like, okay, what's my goal? Am I trying to check off a box? Or am I actually trying to grow and learn?
I think that's a really good point, right? And to kind of, I guess, frame that in the context of the question that Spencer was asking too is, do I use it every day? Right. And I would even argue, or no, sorry, Darrius, you're the one that asked that question. So I would say I wouldn't expect that to be the case on any certification, that I use the knowledge of the body of knowledge within that certification every single day. Unless we're talking about like a Network Plus. Like I lean heavy on my network knowledge day in and day out to communicate to customers on how things work, right? Or to communicate to peers on how things work. But yeah, so entry level stuff. Like I will tell you, having the body of knowledge that exists within Network and Security Plus from CompTIA, and I know CompTIA gets a lot of shade thrown on them just for being simple multiple choice question answer stuff, but those are key cornerstone certifications in my book. Now, I don't think everybody needs to have it, but you need to know the material inside of it. And by having the cert, I can feel confident in talking to someone about how networking works if I know they're Network Plus certified. So,
yeah,
and I think that's important. But go ahead.
Yeah, and those fill a void where experience might be lacking, right? So I come from Brad, like you, from a IT help desk sysadmin background. Darrius has a background in IT as well, in development. So like the three of us have IT in sysadmin level experience. We've been in IT environments. We've done those things. So I think that helps fill those gaps. So somebody like us, not necessarily going to be sitting for Security Plus or Network Plus. We might have done that initially when we first started, right? But we have some of that prerequisite knowledge, I'll say, to kind of fill those gaps where if you don't, if you're a junior pen tester and you've never administered AD, you've never done a help desk, you've never done that, those are good certs to get to introduce you to those subjects. Pentest Plus can be that too. Darrius, I know you wanted to mention EJPT. Yep. A lot of those entry level prerequisite knowledge type certifications can help you kind of get your first job, maybe not necessarily as a pen tester, right? But can help fill those gaps where you're missing that information and why things work the way they do, from a fundamental like core knowledge basis.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think, there is no magic cert in my book, right? There's no one like holy grail certification that I think every pen tester should go get.
CEH.
Obviously. Are we going to talk about why everybody hates the CEH? I don't see it on the agenda.
Well, hey, they're not sponsoring us. So.
Yeah. Oh, they are not a fan of mine. I can promise you that. So, but yeah, so probably, don't want to dive too deep into that, but I do think that those, even those simple certs, right? The ones that are not holy grail certs, probably not CEH, but like Pentest Plus, for example, if you want a multiple choice test that shows a reasonable body of knowledge that applies directly to offensive security, I think that fits the bill. Now, am I going to go hire a Pentest Plus dude as a senior pen tester on my team? No chance, right? I want to see something that has a larger body of knowledge and maybe an actual performance-based test, right? And so, I mean, okay, let me ask this. From a categories perspective, is that the two categories that we put tests in, performance-based and multiple choice? Or is it a hybrid?
I would say most are your better ones are hybrid now. I would say.
Okay.
I know CEH is still strictly multiple choice, but I know what I think is interesting for me and is now you have certifications that are now based off of actual engagements where it's like, hey, you have 7 days to perform a pen test. I think that right there is a whole other level versus I know with the Pentest Plus, there's a PBQ portion, but it's very simple. It's a lab. It's basically, hey, if you paid attention and read the book, basically redo what you did in the lab. But to actually say, hey, you have X amount of days, and here's the network, and you have to produce and write an actual report. I think that belongs in its own category personally, because that's just that changes the game.
It's just awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. GPen was kind of both, right? It had hands-on labs, interactive stuff, and it had multiple choice. So GPen was like that, where it was kind of a hybrid of both. PNPT is strictly lab-based. OSCP, as we know, is all lab-based. So I think they have their purposes, and they fill their own kind of niche, I will say, for the material. Like those multiple choice exams are really good for just kind of introducing you to the foundational knowledge, showing that you have some experience or some requisite understanding of those topics. But the labs obviously you can demonstrate better that you understand the topic and that you can kind of articulate it on a report and things like that. So it's a different beast altogether.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure. I definitely prefer to see those performance-based or lab-based certifications. Again, just looking at it from a management perspective, like I just know those are harder, and the level of preparation and commitment to getting those. And for me, that's really all a cert is, right? A cert tells me that you as a human being have taken some time to learn something well enough to pass a test on it. And it's just like having a degree, right? It just means that you can embrace the suck at a university for 4 to 6 years and come out having completed a long-term project. I view certs as a micro degree, if that makes sense. Just that you have enough discipline to accomplish a thing. If it also happens to be on the subject of your job, then that's kind of a bonus in my opinion. But yeah. So
yeah, I know we wanted, I don't know what you guys felt, but do we want to talk about a couple certifications in particular and kind of talk about why we think there's value in them versus others? And then also we can kind of talk about our own opinions on them and why we think they're of value and why they're not. Like I alluded to earlier, Darrius, I think, is a big fan of OSCP. I am not as big of a fan of it for a few reasons. So I'd be curious to hear and go back and forth on that.
Yeah. So before, but I do too. I think the opinion part of this particular episode is the most interesting. But you guys have broken some of these out into tiers, and so I think it's important for the listeners to A, understand what the tiers are, and B, why the thing fell into that tier, because this is really good stuff. And I agree with you guys on it. So
yeah, I'll start, Darrius, and you can hop in. So when thinking about this episode, I just naturally, started to think about, entry level, intermediate, and then kind of advanced, kind of how you would progress through this. I put Security Plus and Network Plus in kind of the entry level. Darrius, I know you added a couple. And then going up to tier 1, I put as like your intermediate level certs. So certs that require you to have some experience, or maybe have already be doing pen testing to some extent, or be doing InfoSec or cybersecurity related functions. I threw CISSP in there. Not a pen testing cert, but that'd be one if at the end, if we have time to talk about it, I'll throw in my 2 cents about that. But other things like PNPT, OSCP, I think is kind of an intermediate certification, we would agree. And the advanced stuff would be things like getting into more niche or some more specifically focused skills for pen testing. So malware development or, C2 infrastructure, cloud stuff, I would argue is more advanced stuff. So that's kind of where I feel some of those certifications lie. So OSEP, I feel like would be an advanced cert.
What is the OSEP? I'm not familiar with that.
Offensive Security Exploit Professional, right? Is that right,
cool.
Darrius?
Okay. Yep.
So that's from Offensive Security, but it's all about, I think it's more so it relies a little bit on Active Directory. So it goes a little bit deeper into that, a little bit of evasion and or defense evasion and things like that. So getting around antivirus and things like that. The Sector 7 malware development stuff, I think, is more advanced, obviously. So it's kind of my thoughts of like where I would rank some of these certifications. What about you, Darrius?
So I think as you're talking, when you're getting into like the tier 0 of having like little to no knowledge, definitely the CompTIA triad is a standard. But I would also like to add kind of the EJPT and the Pentest Plus. I think those are pretty good. Like, hey, I've never done anything offensive security related whatsoever. It's a good way to kind of get your feet wet. And I think kind of the benefit of the EJPT in particular is the fact that it's also kind of in the format of, hey, you're conducting a pen test, but it's very high level in terms of what you actually have to do. But you still have to write a report, which I think is pretty cool. And then once you start getting into your tier 1s, and I'm always going to be an advocate for the GWAPT. There's actually kind of surprisingly, there's not that many web app
There's not
certifications, or at least on the ones that are out there. They still don't have kind of that punching power that you may get from some of your other certifications. So hopefully somebody will come out with something relatively soon. But so far, I'd say SANS, the GWAPT, seems to be the gold standard as far as from a tier 1 intermediate perspective. And then once you start getting to your more advanced, I think the only thing that's really out there from a web app pen test perspective is the OWSE from Offensive Security. And that one is more so, it's more so your source code analysis. It's, can you find the vulnerability by reading the code versus, loading up Burp Suite and, poking around the site.
Yeah,
I agree.
And you'll notice, hearing Darrius and I talk about certifications, you'll tell immediately that Darrius is an external web API pen tester, and I'm an internal pen tester, just because of the way we talk about certifications.
Yeah.
Like mine are very network based and internal AD oriented and stuff like that, and Darrius is very much web external API driven type pen testing. So it's interesting to hear. For those who haven't been listening for a while. That's kind of why you're hearing us talk about things a little bit differently in different certifications. So,
and that's you actually hit on something that's really of gripe of mine when it comes to pen testing certs and offensive security certs in general. Is a lot of them cast a really wide net, right? Which is an unrealistic thing in the world of pen testing. Like there are no external pen testing certifications, right? So, we have to operate within the confines of an engagement in the professional world. It seems to me that none of these certifications, except for the web app and maybe some of the mobile pen testing certifications, there's like 2 out there. Except for those, these other more broad pen test certs like the GPen, like the OSCP, kind of lump everything together. So, which, I mean, I guess that's cool, but for somebody whose job it is to do external pen testing, for example, there's reconnaissance that they do that you don't do in internal pen testing. And there are, in a web app world, man, we don't give a crap what that web server is running. All right. Unless it just happens to show up as part of our pivot once we've compromised the apps. So the perspective is important that I think is ignored a little bit by the pen testing certification market. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah. And so, actually kind of both of you kind of touched on something that I think is super important, because I'm sure we all get asked, like, what cert do I need to be a pen tester? And I think it really just comes down to what's your goal. Mm-hmm. If your goal is to be a web app pen tester, then that's probably what you need to focus on. I think though, from a marketability standpoint, having kind of different certs and different things makes you appear more well-rounded. And I think, Spencer, that's kind of part of the reason for me, that's kind of how I view the OSCP. So I'm definitely a web app guy. And so like my plan is to tackle some of the more advanced web app certs, but I also know it's probably good for me to have a cert and some knowledge for network or internal pen testing. And for me, that's where like the OSCP kind of comes in. It's kind of like, hey, there's a heavy hitter cert. It has that brand recognition. It checks off boxes. And so it's to be able to say like, hey, I have this, and I can like say, okay, I'm internals. Cool. Because internals aren't really my thing. And then, I can focus more so on the web apps, web app certs. I do think that's kind of part of the reason why I am so gung ho about the OSCP.
Yeah.
So why don't you like it, Spencer?
Uh, so my core complaint with OSCP is I think it's counter to what penetration testing is all about. So I think the perception that they've kind of created this artificially inflated construct is I think the words I used before in our chat. I think they've made up an artificially inflated reputation for this certification and kind of made a cult like following out of it around their whole thing of try harder, right? And I'm by no means against trying and kind of pushing your way through a problem. I mean, Darrius and I just did that last week. I mean, we were working on something for 48 hours. We were trying to prove ask on a machine and we finally got it and we, just tried harder, right? But to be fair, I didn't just try harder. I reached out to different resources. I used different things to achieve that goal. And I didn't just strictly just sit at my keyboard and like try like entering things over and over and over again. So my biggest complaint with OCP is kind of this mentality that you should just bang your head on the wall until you like kind of figure it out without any help. And I think that's kind of counter to what penetration testing is about, because we're supposed to find vulnerabilities, demonstrate risk to an organization and help them kind of understand that risk and demonstrate it. So I wish OSCP was a little bit more geared towards, what a pen tester might do at their job, not just, like owning an AD. The second gripe I have with that, and then I'll let you guys talk, is it's either all or nothing. Like with AD on the OSCP, you either compromise it all or you get nothing. And in the real world, like it doesn't matter if you get domain admin. Like
right.
The client doesn't necessarily care if you get domain admin or not. Did you demonstrate risk to them and can articulate it in a way that they understand?
Yeah.
So that's a couple of my gripes with OSCP.
Cool. Yeah, I can understand that.
And that's from a perspective of somebody who hasn't sat for OSCP. So grain of salt. I haven't sat for OSCP yet. I've only, researched it and looked at it. I've listened to other people's opinions. I know people who have taken it and passed and failed. So, I mean, I obviously have not sat for it yet, but those are just my opinions as an outsider looking in and what I wish that cert would represent.
So Brad, I believe you sat for it, right?
So I didn't sit for the actual exam. Though this is a number of years ago, I bought the training material and I did the lab. And so the lab is from what I understand, a mirror to a degree of what the actual exam is. And you have to like hit all of these flags and accomplish all these things. And I was able to get through it in the time allotted. And so in theory, had that been the exam, I would have gotten through it without too much trouble. And it did kind of feel that way, right? It had an impression of you're locked in a dark room and you don't leave until it's over, right? And you either win or you lose. And so I can see why people would get that, that impression from the certification. At the same time, I have a pretty strong opinion about the CISSP and how it's not what everybody thinks it is, but
agreed.
You can't argue with brand recognition. And if you go into a room full of IT folks or security folks and you say you got an OSCP and a CISSP, nobody's going to say shit to you, right?
Yeah.
You kind of took the words right out of my mouth. Like, it's brand recognition. It kind of goes back, earlier you got the check off a box certs, and then you have the real world. I'm actually going to use this somewhat certs, and I definitely don't think the OSCP is in some of it you're going to use, but like I will say, I'm not a fan of the fact that certain tools are banned, because it's like in a real engagement, I'm going to use a tool. Like I have a set time. I'm not going to manually do everything. It's definitely not realistic to an actual engagement, but man, I just feel like you can't argue with the results of if you have the letters at the end of your name, especially if you haven't landed a pen tester job yet, and you're trying to get that. The OSCP, as to me, is still the number one. I am trying to become a pen tester. and I'm trying to land that first gig, that is the cert that for the most part will help you, will achieve that goal for you.
Yeah. And I would say all certifications are a checkbox. In the even the best certification out there, right? Even the GPEN, which is I think Spencer might argue like a step up from the OSCP, because all of the TTPs are out of date, right? By the time you get that cert in your inbox, it's already old, and so at a maximum, you might retain like, oh, I remember that I used this tool, or maybe the workflow or whatever, but all of these things are out of date immediately. Like somebody sat for the CEH recently and they were still teaching Cain and Abel, which has not been, it doesn't even run anymore. If you can find the binary, the domain has been confiscated. That tool was dead 10 years ago and they're still teaching it. And, same for all of them to a degree.
Yeah. And I'll say, I sat for the GPEN, I have the GPEN, and
see, that just illustrates my point right there. I'll give it to anybody, man.
I know, right? Having gone through it, though, I will say that some of the material is out of date, and the current GPEN as it exists today is out of date. I think some of it's a bit irrelevant. There's newer techniques that are better. There's things that are not taught in GPEN that are being used every day by pen testers, and it's just not in the current GPEN. The GPEN is getting updated. So there's a new GPEN being released soon-ish, I think. But unfortunately, you don't get access to that. You have to pay again for the course and all that, and do it all over again, which is a drawback to me. In contrast to that, something like the PNPT, which I think is the new gold standard for intermediate / introductory penetration testing certifications. The Practical Network Penetration Tester by TCM Academy. That, I think, is the new gold standard for a pen testing cert for somebody that's just getting into it. Because for a number of reasons, but they give you lifetime access to their course. So if they update their course, you have access to that. And I feel like it's a better representation of what a pen tester does than any of the other certifications out in the market right now. Cool. But yeah, one of the reasons with the downsides that I wrote down in my notes for GPEN is that it's a little bit out of date, and they're updating it, but you don't get access to that. You have to pay the whole kit and caboodle again.
Yeah, and I think to some degree they're all going to be out of date because there's a lag time that it takes to create one of these exams. And I mean, just look at the evolution of how we attack Active Directory in the last 12 months. It's not even, it doesn't even look the same. You know what I mean? And web apps the same way. The speed at which we come up with new freaking web app languages, man. And so and we're still discovering new ways to exploit web apps. So doesn't matter what you get, it's out of date. And so keep that in mind that it is a snapshot in time. Like that dude or dudette that took that exam knew some stuff at that moment. And that's really all a cert is. But I do like the PT, by the way. Are we uniformly agreeing that is the superior intermediate pen testing cert?
I don't know if Darrius would agree, but
I feel like it's getting there. I feel like it's getting there. I just from reading forums and Reddit and things of that nature, yes, if you want to actually learn, but it still doesn't necessarily have.
Who wants to do that?
Some of that name recognition just yet.
Yeah. Sure. So I will say, yeah. So I agree with you, Darrius. I mean, there's a reason why offensive security has a reputation. To some extent, like I said earlier, I think it's artificial and I think it's unnecessarily inflated due to marketing and, for those reasons. But without a doubt, when I was looking at pivoting from my last job, I was interviewing for all sorts of roles, and I got to this company and they're like, "Hey, do you have your OSCP?" And I'm like, "No." They're like, "Okay, cool. Call us when you got it, and we'll put you in the running for an interview." Like, not even to like talk to somebody, just like in the running for the interview. So I get it. My own personal opinion is that's artificially like created, to make them more money. And that video that you posted the other day was really insightful because, they have, uh, tons of students, in the way that they construct their labs, and having shared environments is kind of interesting, but I digress.
Yeah. But I agree with you guys across the board, right? Get one of them. If the brand recognition, the name recognition is, if you've heard of it, you guys can kind of attest to this, right? If you're trying to get into the security world, you've already heard of the big certs. Everybody knows what the CISP is, Security Plus, Network Plus for your entry level stuff, and the most important thing is don't get bogged down in what cert is what, right? Unless you're trying to specialize in like web apps or something like that. But if you're trying to break into the market, just get certs. I don't care which one it is. I'm not going to tell you that you're not going to get a job if you get the PNPT over the OSCP, right? Because anybody in this industry will recognize those certifications and say this person at the very least knows what they're talking about.
Yep. And it shows initiative, and it shows that you're ambitious enough to study for something and to pursue something, even if you fail. It shows that you're trying, right? It shows that you are serious about it and that you want to learn and get better. So, for those reasons, like even if you fail, like definitely go after them, because it's just gonna help you in the long run.
Agreed. Closing thoughts, gentlemen.
I have but one. SANS, bring back the 642, the Advanced Web App course.
Please bring it back. I'll be in there with you if they would. It makes me sad that I didn't take it before they took it down.
If anyone from SANS happens to watch this, bring it back. We'll pay. Yep. I'll go.
Yep. And if you need an instructor, I'll teach you.
Right.
Not even kidding. So anyway,
my closing thought would be to have a assume breach certification, like assume breach pen test certification. There's a number of companies that do a course. There's a couple companies that I know have an assume breach, like training course, but not like a official certification as far as I'm aware. So I think that is kind of a small gap in the certification market. But assume breach is really, really popular. And it's different from network-based pen testing. So that would be cool to see.
Agreed. I would like to see both of those for sure. So, folks, that's all the time we have for you this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and we will see you next Wednesday.